Hello, Evan. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you
I'm
so much
going
for
to
having me.
I'm going to start by introducing the audience to your work through your bio, and then we have so many things to discuss. Evan H. Hirsch, MD, also known as the EnergyMD, is a world-renowned fatigue expert, best-selling author, and professional speaker. He is the creator of the EnergyMD Method, the science-based and clinically proven four-step process to resolve chronic fatigue and long COVID naturally. Through his best-selling book, podcast, and international online programs, he has helped thousands of people around the world. He has been featured on TV, podcasts, and summits. And when he's not at the office, you can find him singing musicals, dancing hip hop, and playing basketball with his family. That sounds like a playful life right there.
Indeed. Yes,
Yeah,
thanks so much for having me on.
thank you. Thank you. So I'm wondering, since you are a fatigue expert, maybe we could start by discussing how is fatigue and burnout and hypervigilance maybe related or different?
Yes.
What would you say?
Yeah, when we look at burnout, burnout is generally an occupational issue. So, it happens at work generally, where people have this emotional exhaustion. They're feeling drained, they're unable to cope with the demands at work potentially. They develop this sort of cynical attitude toward work, and they're not really enjoying their job. They're feeling ineffective typically and maybe unproductive at work. So it's usually situational where it has to do with their work. When they're on vacation, they feel great, right? When they're not working because they don't have that emotional burden. Fatigue really adds in more of the physical burdens. A lot of the work that I do is people have worked a lot on certain aspects of their health, but there are toxicities that have built up in their bodies that unfortunately end up triggering inflammation and end up decreasing the amount of energy that a person can produce. So then they have this chronic tired feeling, and it's different for everybody. Generally, it's kind of like a tiredness that's not relieved by rest. So no matter if they go away on vacation or if they just take a week off from work or whatever it is, they're still tired. And it's because the toxic five have kind of built up in their body throughout time. These is heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma. So that's kind of like the physical, the mental, and kind of the emotional piece. And then the hypervigilance really comes from the nervous system and the hormones in the body that are kind of stuck in a fight or flight or freeze response, where from some of the mental, emotional, and sometimes even the physical, the body is on high alert. So it makes it hard to go to sleep. It makes it hard to relax because the body has this alertness that is hypervigilance. And consequently, when you have that hypervigilance, that can end up leading to fatigue because of the different hormones that are being produced and the damage that ends up happening to the mitochondria, which is trying to produce the energy that you need in order to function throughout the day.
Are we talking about when you say the hormonal thing, are we talking the adrenal rush, sort of being addicted to this sort of thing?
Correct. So
Yes.
it's always a combination of all the hormones, but yes, the adrenals are the sentinel gland. And for those who aren't familiar, the adrenal gland is a small triangular gland that sits on top of the kidneys and produces a number of hormones, including adrenaline in the middle part of the gland and cortisol, which is in the outside part of the gland. That's our main get up and go hormone. It creates our circadian rhythm. So kind of like what time we wake up, what time we go to sleep. It manages our immune system. It manages inflammation. Everybody's heard of prednisone and cortisone, right, as these prescription things that you would potentially take to decrease inflammation. They all come from cortisol, which is inherently made inside of our body.
And I'm really wanting to focus on the word naturally in your bio, that you are dealing with these issues through natural means. Please tell us more about that.
Sure.
Mm.
So I'm a medical doctor, but everything that I do, I practice online only, and so across state lines and national lines, and everything that I do is 100% natural. So it's lifestyle habits, it's vitamins, it's minerals, it's herbs, and so with the work that I do, we always want to figure out like what the causes are, and then when we're reversing the causes, what I found is that I have very powerful tools that are natural, so I no longer had to prescribe anymore. So I think as we get into the 4-step process, whenever you want to talk about that, we can kind of go deeper into like what are some of the natural components that we look at.
Yes, whenever you're ready, please. We want to hear about your four-step process. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I created a process called the EnergyMD Method over the last decade in working with people with chronic fatigue and now with long COVID. Um, and people who have ME/CFS as well, which is chronic fatigue syndrome. And the first step of this process is to figure out the causes that people have. So, it's one thing if you have the work issues going on, but if you have these physical components as well, then it's beyond the mental and emotional. There's also these physical. Now, fortunately, 75 to 90% of all the causes that somebody has can be determined by their symptoms alone. Okay, so you don't need fancy laboratory tests or anything like that. And so first thing is to figure out the causes that people have. Now, when we look at these causes, they can really be classified into deficiencies. These are things that are not in your body or in your life that need to be. And toxicities, these are things that are in your body and in your life that shouldn't be, that need to be removed. And so when we're looking at deficiencies, we're looking at things like deficiencies in hormones, like the adrenals that we talked about, thyroid or sex hormones, the mitochondria, which produces 70 to 90% of our energy. There's vitamins and minerals that can be deficient. There's neurotransmitters that can be deficient. And then there's the lifestyle habits. So not enough good food, not enough good water, not enough good movement, not enough good sleep. Right. And all those things you have so much control over that you can make those changes. And I would also even say not enough good play. Right. We're talking about play mind today, right? And how important it is to have that play, to have that childlike curiosity, right? So those are some of the deficiencies. And then the toxicities, I mentioned the toxic 5 before, but I'm going to say them again because they're really important for you to remember and write down, are heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma. And so those are the things that kind of build up in our lives and in our bodies throughout time until our bodies call it quits and say, no more. And all it generally takes is some sort of stressful event, and so it could be stress at work. It could be a breakup. It could be a divorce. It could be a car accident. And then it actually allows a number of these toxins to come out and to be more of an issue. It could be COVID. That's what we're seeing with long COVID right now, that these people have these toxins that have built up in their bodies over time, and then they get this infection, and then all bets are off, and they get a lot of different symptoms that cause them problems, right? So step one is to figure out the causes that you have. And then the rest of the process is to fix those causes. So in step two, we're replacing the deficiencies, the hormones and whatnot, because that makes people more resilient. That gets that circadian rhythm back in gear. That fixes or starts to work on the adrenal gland and the mitochondria. It increases your energy a little bit. It decreases that hypervigilance. It improves the nervous system function. So that's what happens in step two, so that you are more resilient. And then in step three, we're opening up the exit pathways. So when we go into step four, we can remove these toxins. And so by exit pathways, it's like liver and kidney and lymph and neurolymph or glymphatic system, which is in the brain, and the gallbladder and the intestine. So these are like all the ways that we get toxins out of the body, so that when we get into step four and we start pulling out heavy metals and chemicals and molds and infections, et cetera, they have a place to go so that they can get out of the body.
Hmm. How interesting. So I'm hearing that the first step, please remind me again, the first step is by rebuilding, was it?
First step is to figure out the causes.
First, figure out the causes. Okay, so when you figure out the causes, you might, do you mean that you might start with detox or end with detox? Because in my mind, I'm always used to thinking, first I have to detox, get rid of what's excess, and then I can start, addressing deficiencies.
So
What do you think of that?
yeah, so that's generally when people come to see me, they've thought that before and it hasn't gone well for them. So if you don't do the steps in this fashion for the majority of people, you'll actually feel worse through the process. So if you start to pull out the toxins and they have no place to go, and then you're going to feel worse. So that means if you're doing step 4 before step 3, since step 3 is like opening those exit pathways. If you do it before step 2, which makes you more resilient, removing toxins is actually stressful on the body. So if you haven't started to replace the adrenals and the mitochondria and some of these other hormones, et cetera, and lifestyle habits, then you don't have the resilience. And consequently, you start to remove the toxins, it's stressful on the body, and then all of a sudden you feel worse and your energy gets worse instead of getting better. So this is kind of, in my answer, I'm not 100%, this is, I'm an imperfect human, and this is kind of like what I've figured out. But there are plenty of people who can go directly to detox. I mean, you buy those detox packets in the store, and for some people, they're fine, right? But for the people that I work with who have all these toxins and they're already fatigued, they have this burden that they're carrying of toxins. And I found that it best works in this process, in this way.
Mhm. And what do you think? What do you think is a symptom that you would see more often than not in physically in work, overwork, overthinking, overworking, overdoing situation? It's the first thing comes to my mind is kind of like inflammation. Is that or how? What else do you think? What could
Yeah.
be typical?
Well, the biggest one really is fatigue. So it's having an energy that's less than where you want it to be. If
Mm,
10 out of 10 is ideal energy, typically these people are somewhere less than 6 out of 10. So I see people who come in with 0 out of 10 up to 6 out of 10, where their energy is not where they want it to be. Majority of people I would say would be 4 out of 10. And so these would be people who, once they, even if they leave their job, or if they go away on vacation, or they take some sort of hiatus from work, or they're able to start to play more at work and start to change their relationship to work, they still find that there's so much fatigue, that they're really tired. In terms of inflammation, what's interesting is that all symptoms come from inflammation. So whether you have pain on the bottom of your feet, or muscle cramps in your calves, or a hard time sleeping, all of those symptoms come from inflammation. And inflammation is the immune system reacting to something that's in the body. The immune system's whole job is to remove things out of the body that aren't supposed to be there. And so when you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections in the body, the immune system will be trying to get rid of those things. And in turn, it will cause inflammation. And normally inflammation is a good thing. But if it can't get those things out of the body, then it's stuck in an inflammatory state. And then you feel poorly. And then your adrenal glands, which are supposed to be managing your inflammation, aren't working the way that they should, because they're trying to deal with the stress of work and the burnout that people have, or the amount of work that they had, and that hypervigilance.
So I'm hearing that you have we have toxicity in the body one way or another. Is that right?
We do. And yeah, and
Yeah.
everybody has it, from the moment that we are born. There's studies to show that there's over 300 different chemicals and toxins found in babies' cord blood. So essentially in the placenta. So babies are coming out with all of these toxins, and then we accumulate throughout their lives. And so, my story, I had chronic fatigue for 5 years before I got over it. And my story was that I got all these toxins from mom when I kind of came out into the world. And then they accumulated over my life. I had chronic constipation. So I continued to recycle toxins. I had mercury fillings. Every time I bit down, I had mercury vapor. I ate a lot of tuna fish, which was high in mercury. I had pesticides in my foods. I lived in moldy places. I kissed people who had different infections. I got bitten by ticks and mosquitoes and whatever. And so I got Lyme disease and Epstein-Barr virus, and all of these things accumulated until my body said, I can't take it anymore. It was actually emotional stress. It was burnout in my business that ended up causing my chronic fatigue. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. But it was all of these other things that ended up accumulating. So I had to deal with all of those things from a physical perspective. But then there was also the mental and the emotional components too, and the mindset work that I've done over the years and that have helped other people do. That is so important.
Yeah. Do you think your singing was part of the solution?
Singing is incredibly helpful on so many different levels. When you're focused on singing, it's a mindfulness practice, and I'm thinking about where the placement is, and I'm thinking about the words that I'm singing and the emotion that I'm trying to convey when I'm acting, and there's nothing else that I can be thinking about in that moment. Right. So there's the mindfulness component. There's the breathing component, taking deep abdominal breaths or diaphragmatic breaths, stretching my lungs and my diaphragm in ways that you don't normally do so. And that ends up working on the vagus nerve and putting you more into your parasympathetic, which is your healing side of your autonomic nervous system. So absolutely. And then it's also a lot of play, and it puts my brain in a different space that's not so analytical and more creative.
Would you say to find something like that, like singing aside from the work? Because I'm also thinking of people, and this was and still is to a good extent, also for me, that our play is also work. Work starts off as our play. It's because we have creative work, and that's where we find our play. So it doesn't have to be like time off of work. So would you say to bring that kind of mindfulness, how would you bring that kind of mindfulness into the work if that is your play?
So I
With
think,
breathing and
oh,
that.
that's what you're saying in terms of how do you bring it into your work. And so, I mean, I think there's a couple things here. So I do think that, yes, taking mini vacations, 5-minute vacations where you put on your favorite song, or you shut the blinds if you're embarrassed and you dance a little bit, or you go for a walk outside, or you find ways in your day in order to have more play. But there's also the component of, I don't believe that. I mean, if you're blessed to be fed creatively by your work, that's an incredible gift. But I think for most people, you're not going to get everything from your work, just like you're not going to get everything from one person in relationship, right? So I think that it's really important to have some of these other outlets. What you're hanging out with friends, that feeds you a certain amount. You exercise, that feeds you. What are some of the other creative things that you can potentially do that feed you in different ways? And especially, as I'm getting older, I mean, I'm only 48, but as I get older and I start to think about retirement, you hear these stories about people who can't retire, right? And
Mhm.
so much of that is being able to retire to something. Right. I mean, I take voice lessons every single week because my goal is that as I get older, I want to continue to get better and better at singing so that at some point I can have a lead in a community theater musical. And, that's kind of like my plan for retirement. I want to travel and I want to do that and I want to learn languages, so it's kind of like having these different interests. And I'm doing all of those things now in order to feed different aspects of my body and my health.
Beautiful. Yes, having different interests seems to be key. In fact, I want to share here, while this brings it up for me, I feel that diversity in itself is the most healing, as if we were able to uh, be energized and feel good about diversity, about having differences, be feeding us instead of threatening, we would be in play mind altogether. Yeah. That would be I think that would be the fastest route for me personally. If I have like in New York City when I lived in New York City for 16 years. And, that was nourishing for me just to see the immense diversity, which brings me how impressed I was when I visited your website recently, and I saw your shop in your website, which is supposed to be one of the least playful parts of anybody's website, but yours was so playful to me because I found there. I'm gonna check. I'm gonna go through the list that I have notes here because it's really very diverse. And these things that you have placed in your shop, I have come to these places, one from here and one from there. First I found about dry brushing, and then about castor oils, and then rebounding, all these different methods of practices that are so playful. They're all placed and they don't seem to have a direct connection with each other. They're just different things that one can do, which are each phenomenal in my experience. And they're all put together in one page on your website. So if you want to see all the different things that one can do, they just need to go to your website, to your shop page, and see, oh, so we have water distillers, air filtration, water filtration. These are all important aspects in our daily routines, aren't they? And I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit to this. Hydrogen peroxide, 3%. And the one that I saw on your site was not in particular mentioned to be consumed, but I know that it's also good to consume this. Is that right? Yeah, and castor oil packs. Yeah, and foot baths for detoxification and sleep systems and pendulum and the red light therapy, and you have brain health apps and organic olive oil. That goes pretty large area of different things that we can do. Please talk a little bit about that. What the difference it makes just to add the castor oils, or just to add a rebounder, or all of these things. Dry brush.
Yeah, and this is an accumulation of all of the products that I use personally that I found that kind of like work over the years. These aren't supplements; these are kind of like different tools that I found that works. And so this is all about getting healthier. I believe that part of living is growing, and I want to grow in every aspect of my life. I want to grow in my relationship with my daughter and my wife, and as a business owner, and as a boss, and as a teacher, and all these other things, including my health. I want to continue to evolve in that way. And so these are all ways in order to do that, right? To have mindfulness around how clean is my water. If people go to ewg.org/tapwater, which is the environmental working group, you can put in your zip code and you can see all of the toxins that are in your tap water, and you'll never want to drink tap water again. So there are a couple of different water filtrations, for example, on our website, where there's a whole house block carbon filtration that I use in my home. And then there's also a distiller, which really is the cleanest way to. It requires a little bit of work to use it every single day, but it is the best way to get the cleanest amount of water possible. So it's like clean water, clean food, clean air. We have air filters that get down to 0.003 microns, which is really important when you're dealing with any sort of mold. It's the only kind of, you have to have an air filter that kind of gets down that far. In terms of the size, to get mycotoxins, or the toxins produced by the molds, right? So it's looking at all these different components of your life, and without getting overwhelmed, because it can be overwhelming to think about all the toxins that we're exposed to, be like, okay, this year I'm going to make this investment. We're going to work on our water this year. And then next year, we're going to work on our food, and we're going to start buying more organic food and start decreasing the amount of processed foods that we're consuming. And then the year after that, we're going to buy an air filter, right? So it's just kind of starting to piece those things together to decrease your exposures, because it's always a combination of the things that you're exposed to on a regular basis, whether they're mental, emotional, or physical, right? Working on our environment. And then working on our internal terrain. What are the thoughts that we're thinking? Right? How do we change those thoughts into something that's serving us better? What are the questions that we're actually asking ourselves? Are we living in scarcity or are we living in gratitude and abundance, right? So it's taking a look at the internal and the external environment and slowly but surely making changes over the course of our lives so that we can continue to grow and improve.
Yes. And some of those things are so simple and inexpensive that one can start right away, that it doesn't have to be a big investment that you have to do year by year, like
Right.
the dry brushing that I'm such a big fan of. I feel difference from the day that I do it to the day that I don't do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, dry brushing is wonderful for your lymph system. Your lymph system is the garbage system in the body, and it's the only system in the body that doesn't have its own pump. And so it's really important to do this with dry brushing. You can do this with walking and movement. That's another great way of doing it. The rebounder, which is very much play, where you're kind of like bouncing on it, that ends up moving your lymph as well. And a lot of things get clogged in the lymph. So that's a wonderful practice. The foot baths help with lymph as well.
Beautiful. Yeah. And how soon do you start these things? Do you teach these things to your children? How do you deal with children in these practices?
Yeah, so
Do they
my
have these
child,
issues?
they
They
have
don't
what?
have this kind of issues. They don't have the kinds of like overdoing, but they start pretty early even, don't they? Even like a 5-year-old can already be overthinking and overdoing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah,
unfortunately, they're supposed to be the first generation that doesn't outlive their parents, right? So unfortunately, they're getting sicker and sicker, our children are.
is
And
that the way?
so, yeah, and a lot of this is the amount of exposures that they have as well. Like when you wake up in the morning and you look at a device that, you're going on social media and you're comparing yourself to others, it's commonly known that comparison is the thief of happiness, right? And so all of a sudden now you're comparing yourself to others and you don't really feel so good. If you are looking at email, depending on how old they are, what's in email? Generally somebody asking something for you to do. So let's say you're still in bed and you're looking at this and then you're like, email, oh, I've got things to do. Now you're starting to get stressed. If you look at the news and you see divisiveness and you see death and you see war and you see all these things, the world is not a safe place or does not appear to be a safe place, right? So now there's scarcity, right? So this is the world that our children exist in when they have these exposures, and oftentimes they're starting off the day with these exposures. Does that set them up for success? Absolutely not. And then these toxins are accumulating over time. Like it used to be that there were 50,000 different chemicals found in our daily lives that we were exposed to. Now we're up to 90,000 chemicals, right? And that's just in the last decade or two. So the more of those toxins that end up getting in their body from the different exposures that they have, the more we're having more and more health issues. I think the numbers are like 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 children now has some sort of mental health diagnosis, right? So it's much more than it has been in the past. ADHD and autism just keep increasing in numbers. So it's really important to try to model these things for our kids. We didn't have a television for the first so many years of my daughter's life. What does their diet look like? And as we go, so do they go, right? And what are we talking about at the dinner table? And how are we managing our health and our mindset? Right now my daughter is 15 years old. She does have access to some social media, some YouTube, some Instagram, but we have conversations. How is this doing for your mental health? Do you notice being in comparison? Do you notice, are you watching any sort of news and how does that news affect you? If you are consuming, we talk about turning it off at night, and sometimes I forget. I have management on my phone, but sometimes I forget to turn it off. And it's like, how did you sleep? When I ask her the next day, and I didn't sleep very well. And I look and I say, well, it looks like you were on Instagram until 10:30 at night. That can definitely be part of it, and she's like, oh no, Dad, that's not the case. But I'm everything that you say as a parent, the child receives, whether or not they want to hear it or not, right? They'll play with it and they'll see if it's accurate, and especially when they're adults, right? So I'm just hoping as we kind of continue to have these conversations in a lighthearted way and environment without a lot of pressure, that will support her into the future and making better decisions, because there's only going to be more toxicity and more technology and AI and whatever these things are. How do we take good care of ourselves in the context of all that?
Mhm. And what conversations do you have at the dinner table?
so so that's what a lot of it is. My wife is a mindfulness coach, and she leads leadership trainings, and so we try to bring in a lot of that conversation to what we're talking about. There's no phones at the table. We're doing our best to eat healthy meals. We're gluten-free, dairy-free, majority sugar-free, and processed food free. So, just trying to model those things and having intellectual conversation about different things. Potentially, we have some debates. So it's kind of interesting to have these conversations with a 15-year-old who has a very different perspective and is kind of bringing different things. And it's like, okay, well, can we have these discussions? Can we be curious? You talked before about diversity. Curiosity is a huge superpower, right? And so how curious can we be about particular conversations that we're having?
And it's an acquired skill, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes, yes, beautiful. Yeah.
So should we talk about mindset?
Of course.
Yeah. So I have a four-step mindset practice that might be helpful to people that can kind of like empower them today.
All
And so
right.
the first step is gratitude. So the research shows that 3 gratitudes a day can significantly decrease anxiety and depression. And this could be the same 3 every day. It can be, thank you for my partner, thank you for my child, thank you for my job, thank you for whatever. But being in gratitude immediately shifts you into the parasympathetic and out of the sympathetic, which is like the fight or flight or freeze, where you have more of that adrenaline. The second step in the process is envisioning your ideal life. The body really doesn't know and the brain doesn't know the difference between imaginary and reality. And so when you envision what you want your life to look like from the moment you wake up until the moment you go to bed, the universe is going to naturally conspire to create that. And I know that sounds woo-woo, but that's kind of how it works. The next step is to look at any sort of disempowering beliefs that you have. What are the thoughts that you're thinking throughout the day that are kind of holding you back, and flipping those into empowering beliefs. And then the last one is looking at disempowering questions that we're asking ourselves. Are we asking ourselves, why am I feeling this way? Or why is my boss such an ass? Or why is the news this or that, or what political stuff, whatever it is. If you're asking yourself um, certain questions that aren't necessarily, the brain is a goal achieving machine. And so you can ask it any question and it will give you a response, but you may not like the response. Why am I not doing well at work? Well, it's because you're lazy or blah, blah, whatever sort of negative thinking that potentially you have, because that's just common for us as humans. But flipping it into a more empowering question, what can I do today to love myself even more? What can I do today to grow even more? Right? So asking ourselves more empowering questions, all of these things, these 4 steps, will change the way that you see the world. It changes the way that the brain is working. It changes your vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system so that you can be in more of a healing state and live a happier existence.
Beautiful. Yeah. Let's see. The question that came to my mind when you were talking about that, what can I do today to improve my mitochondria? Because the supplement area is a big field and it looks pretty expensive to delve into. Could you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So um, there's 2 things that kind of need to be thought about when you're fixing your mitochondria. Now, for those who aren't familiar, the mitochondria is the energy center of every cell in the body, found in every cell except for red blood cells, produces about 70 to 90% of our energy. or ATP. So it's very important in producing energy. It also works with hormones to improve absorption of hormones, and acts as an enzyme to help with the conversion of different hormones, including thyroid hormone. And so it's really important and inherent in kind of the work I do as the EnergyMD. So there's two things. One is there's boosting the number of mitochondria in the body and the function of the mitochondria. And then there's also removing the things that are damaging the mitochondria. So you remember those toxic five, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and trauma. All of those things will damage the mitochondria. So you can boost the mitochondria until the cows come home, but if you don't remove the things that are damaging the mitochondria, you will never get the mitochondria well. So it kind of has to be that kind of two-step process. And there are supplements that you can take to boost the mitochondria. And if you don't want to spend a lot of money, you can go with single agents, whether it's CoQ10, 100 milligrams, 200, 300, or acetyl L-carnitine, 500 milligrams, or some D-ribose, 5 grams, or PQQ to increase the number of mitochondria. Or you can do certain lifestyle things at home. So one of the things is to do a cold plunge after you are exposed to heat. So I have a sauna. After I do my sauna in the morning, I go and I take a shower, normal temperature, hot shower. I like hot showers. And then at the end, I turn it to cold. And the coldest that I can stand, or the coldest that my shower can do. And then I take deep breaths and I kind of try to stay as long as I can in there, front of my body for 10 deep breaths, back of my body for 10 deep breaths, and then on my bald spot, on the top of my head for as long as I can tolerate it until my head starts to hurt. And those are really good. Doing that kind of heat cold transition is really good for boosting your mitochondria. And there's a number of other things you can do, but that's probably a really good takeaway that anybody could do right now. You don't have to have a cold plunge where you like jump into a cold water up to your neck. You can do that if you want to make that investment, but you can also just do it in your shower. But that's a tip on increasing your mitochondria that doesn't cost you anything.
Thank you. Thank you. And we can go back on the video and get those names and write them down because yeah. Yeah. How would you like to? Oh, actually, I wanted to also ask you about water. The water. I'm hearing about how drinking a lot of water does not necessarily because this is big one, right? The water, hydration, and drinking of the water is not necessarily corresponding. Like you may be drinking a lot of water and still not keeping enough hydration in the body. And does that have to do with the mitochondria too, or how does that work?
That has to do more with the adrenals. So the adrenal gland produces something called aldosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that acts on the kidneys that causes salt reabsorption. So if you didn't have aldosterone, you would pee out all of your salt, your sodium, your potassium. And so the aldosterone causes the salt to be reabsorbed in the body. And the salt utilizes what's called osmotic gradient to kind of keep the water in the body. So if you're just drinking water and you feel like you're peeing all the time and you're not holding on to your water, it's probably because your adrenals are taxed. Especially if you're watching this and you have burnout and hypervigilance, those are indicative of your adrenals and fatigue. Your adrenals are not functioning correctly. And so consequently, if they're not functioning correctly, you're not producing aldosterone, you're not reabsorbing your salt. So usually these people are craving salt and sweet foods. So the joke is that you can't walk by a bag of tortilla chips or a bag of potato chips without having to reach in because you want that sweet and you want that salt. So what you can do is you can take some sea salt and you can put it into your water bottle. And you can do it to taste. So you can keep, every single day, put in a little bit more, see how it tastes. If you feel like you're going to vomit because you feel like you're drinking ocean water, then that's too much salt. But you can keep on putting in that sea salt. And as long as you don't get a headache and you don't get any swelling in like your ankles or anything like that, that can be really supportive for you. It keeps the fluid more inside the body. It increases your blood pressure. Most of these people who have burnout and they've got adrenal issues, their blood pressure is actually lower because of this phenomenon with the salt. And so if your blood pressure is lower than 120 over 80, that means that your blood pressure is low, especially if it's less than 110 or less than 100, that's really low. And so by taking in the salt with the water, it can increase your blood flow to the brain and increases your blood pressure, and it can make you feel more normal. This is oftentimes why people need to lie down during the day, is because they're trying to regulate their blood pressure. They're getting fatigued, they've got burnout, and they want to lie down flat and for about 15 minutes, and that ends up regulating the blood pressure, and then you can stand back up because it's the body's inability to get the blood to the brain that ends up making you tired. So, drinking high quality water, distilled is the best, but filtered is second best, and then adding in some sea salt, as long as you're not getting any side effects or you don't feel worse from it, that can be incredibly supportive as well.
Thank you, thank you. And I have one more question for you about the sweets. I always feel without chocolate, it's it's not worth, it's not worth it. Life is not worth it without chocolate. And now they're finding that chocolate is not a problem, actually. It's the sugar, not the chocolate,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I
So
agree.
yeah, and this to me feels very much play mind. The sweets, I have a sweet tooth to be sure, and but chocolate and making it with less sugar is like how I'm trying to deal with that. What would you say for people with sweet tooth, and how does that bring us home to sweetness and play mind?
Mhm. So I also have a sweet tooth, and so it's just about making better choices. So I start my day off with cacao, which is, 100% cocoa or cacao,
Mhm.
and I use unsweetened almond milk that doesn't
Mhm.
have any sugar in it, and then I use stevia. And so if you don't like
Oh.
the taste of stevia, and so I make a hot drink out of that, and I drink that every morning, and so
Uh-huh.
there's no sugar in any of that.
Mhm.
Stevia is also nicely antimicrobial, so it can kill some infections, certain kinds of infections. And so there's making that sort of choice and utilizing different sugars instead of the regular sugars. So whether if you don't like the taste of stevia, you can always do monk fruit or lohan or agave. Those are always going to be better. And then you can get into honey or maple syrup before you can get into some of the other sugars that really aren't serving you best. The other thing too is remembering why we have a sweet tooth. So we have a sweet tooth because we are supposed to eat berries. We're supposed to eat certain things, and it's fruits mainly. And so when you want to eat something sweet, go and eat a piece of fruit. It also has the fiber, so it's going to bind up the sugars and release them more slowly into the body. So it has a lower glycemic index and lower glycemic load, which means the sugar is not going to spike as much, and it's going to be better for your blood vessels and your inflammation, etc. So if you want something that's going to be a little bit colder, like maybe like an ice cream, you can always get frozen fruit. You can get some of these, gosh, what's that machine we used to use? Like a Nana Go Nanner, I think is what it's called. And you can basically press fruit through there, frozen fruit, and it comes out and it looks like a sorbet, essentially. But you've got all the fiber, and it's a nice treat. So a lot of that is, and then the other thing too is that oftentimes when you're craving sweets or you're hungry, you're actually really thirsty, but our thirst mechanisms are not as well developed as our hunger mechanisms. So, drinking like 20 ounces of water when you're hungry, oftentimes can settle things down, and then you can really evaluate, am I actually hungry? right? So, and there are chocolates that are made with stevia, and their chocolate does have some caffeine in it, but for a lot of people, it's not necessarily an issue. For some people, they might be reacting for different reasons. Maybe it's the caffeine, maybe it's actually the tannins or the different components of the chocolate if they have certain sensitivities. But it all comes back to, in terms of play mind, to being curious. Is to being curious about, how can I, instead of being like, oh, I have to, anytime you think have to or should, you end up shoulding all over yourself, right? And we don't want to do that, right? So it's more about being curious about, what can I do if I want to consume chocolate? How can I do it in a more healthy way, as opposed to I should be eating chocolate differently, right? It's just going to resonate differently in your body, and you get to be more creative. You get to be more playful. You get to be more curious.
Yes. Actually, I tell myself all the time not all the time anymore because I don't should myself anymore so much, but when I do, I remind myself of the story where there's this truck that goes to every little street on every town and city in every world. So wherever you are, there's a truck coming every Sunday between 11 and 1 o'clock, and you can give them your shoulds and woulds and coulds away. Yeah,
I
every
love that.
Sunday.
That's
So
great.
I collect them and then give them away on Sundays. It's good practice. Yeah,
That's brilliant.
yeah. Thank you so much, Evan. How would you like to close with our audience? Is there anything you want to say?
I think as humans, we overestimate the amount that we can get done in a day, and we underestimate the amount we can get done in a year. And so, we've talked about a lot of different things that people can take action and do today. And, it's all about baby steps. These action steps are not meant to stress you out. If it stresses you out, don't do it. you know, but you can plan and you can find a time where things are going to work better for you. But taking a look at your life, evaluating it from a stress perspective, this is stressing me, this is stressing me, this is stressing me, whatever, that can give you a better lens for, okay, do you have more things that stress you than don't stress you, than feed you? And let's work on that balance, and then plan that out and set alarms in your phone, alarms along the way. And eventually, habits are created from other habits. And so if you have a particular habit of doing something good for yourself or doing whatever, you can attach a habit onto that. So if you have a habit of, coming into your office and sitting in your chair, if you put something on your desk that reminds you to have more play or have more fun or have more joy, like my alarm goes off at 12 o'clock every day that says sing and have lunch. So I turn around and I have my music right there and I sing, and then I go have lunch, right? But it's that alarm that helps me. So use some of these tools, the technology that we have, and have those baby steps, and realize that at the end of a year of adding in a little bit along the way, your life is going to be incredibly different at the end of the year. And, a year is what, 1/80th of your life potentially. Like, it's a small amount when you look at it over the course of your life. And if you make significant changes every single year, you're going to have monumental growth and happiness in your life.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you. And it doesn't even have to be, look, I have my little note here right on my desk without an alarm. That reminds me. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Very good advice. Thank you. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, everyone.